Hi there, this is Matt Taylor at ravensbridge.com. Welcome to the second part in the Team Kranium 3D game series. In the previous part we built and textured a 3D model that we're going to use in an XNA game studio game. We created this in UTech Lightwave 9. Now, in this part we're going to talk about surface baking our textures into a texture map. After doing the last part, what I've done is in the surface editor I've added some extra textures. These are both procedural textures. There is a gradient texture which will change the colour of the building based on how far away from the ground it is. Starting at the ground, working up to 2.5 meters, which is the height of our building. What this will do is this will, around where the roof area is, we'll just have like a nice little paint layer. And then on top of the other textures, I've then added a procedural texture which will create just like a dirt map, make it look grubby. This layer opacity is about 22%, and it's using a Photoshop filter called Color Burn. A Photoshop blending mode called Color Burn. Anything marked as P-Shop in this list works exactly the same as the Photoshop filter of the same name. So if we use texture. Right, so this has now caused a bit of a problem, because while Lightwave and other 3D graphics programs are able to render procedural textures, this is actually quite slow and the graphics card can't do it. So we can't provide a procedural texture to our DirectX graphics card. It just won't work. So what we need to do is we need to create a texture map using a UV map, which we'll create now, and then surface through a process called surface baking, take the textures we have created and the procedural textures and convert them all into a flat image. And what we've got here is we have a map showing which polygons on here go to which part of the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to clear my UV map and we'll start again. So the first thing I did was I took the roof, because that's quite a flat area. So I've got a UV map, so I can and this is just changed from our window here. So what I want to do is get all of these polygons sitting inside this, so that we can then then we create a texture map. So if we make UVs using a planar projection on the y-axis, what this will do is this will basically look down from the top and take these polygons and push them onto here. So if we create, we can now see that we've got the roof polygons. And if we select these, you can see which polygons are which. Using the H tool, which is scale, okay, I keep forgetting to say this. Always use points on a UV map. If you use polygons, it doesn't like it. This is because UV maps work only on points. There's not really any polygons here. So what I'm going to do is I'll just grab that, shrunk it, pushed it off to the side so it's out of our way. The next part we want to do is grab these end areas. So let's grab these and grab these, and now we're going to use a different process. We're going to say make UVs, and we're going to use Atlas. And what Atlas does is it basically tries automatically the best it can to get all of these polygons onto a flat surface. And Atlas works really well for like boxy things. It doesn't work very well for organic looking things, because you end up with triangles all over the place. For those sort of maps, spherical or cylindrical probably work the best, and planar, as you saw with the roof, works best with flat surfaces. So if we make new UVs using the Atlas, you can see we now have two ends of our buildings, and you can see by selecting these how they map on to the 3D model. And using Atlas again, we can make UVs There we go. We've got our map, and this actually fits together quite well just as it's done it. What we need to do now is get everything fitted without moving stuff using polygon select. Using only the points. I'm going to remember this all one day. Get everything to fit inside the grid here, because this grid, this square, is going to be where our texture is. So if we just save this, what we can now do is move this, sorry, still got that window open, move this to layout. Now layout is similar to the 3ds Max we're used to, where we lay out all the cameras, lights, objects. What we want to do is, the first thing we want to do is change our lighting so that we're using 100% ambient lighting and 0% directional lighting. This is because we don't want any shadows in this image, we just want the textures. So if we render this now, we can see we've got the end of the building, and we've got our procedural texture on top with our dirt map and our paint line, and yeah, it looks okay. Now what this is doing, this is doing it from a perspective camera. So what we need to do now is change our perspective camera by pressing properties or P from a classic camera into a surface baking camera. This is really not a camera anymore. It's creating a camera that unfolds our model based on the UV map we just created. So we're going to select our texture map, which is what we called our UV map. Generally I leave all these the same. We don't need baked surroundings because we're not doing any special lighting effects, and we just close that. So now what happens if we say render frame, which is F9, is we get all of our textures plus our procedural textures all rendered onto the same map that we created a moment ago. If I pop back to Modeler, you can see that this map here looks pretty much the same. Now the last thing we want to do is say change the size of our camera so that it's 512 by 512 pixels. This is because graphics cards don't like square images. Don't like images that aren't square and aren't powers of 2 in size. So this is why we're using 512, because that will give us a nice size texture for what we want, which is also square, which is also a power of 2 in size. So if we render that again, luckily we're not doing anything that's too slow, you'll see we now have a nice square image. So if we take File, Save RGBA, and we can just save this out as a PNG 24. So we call it hut texture 2. Save that. Now if we switch back to Modeler, we can then in here load in the image we just created. So now we have our texture that we just created in here. And then the last thing we want to do before moving on to the next stage is go into the surface editor, select our textures, turn off all our procedural textures, add a new image map layer using UV projection, using the texture map we created, using the image we just rendered out. And then we can copy the selected layer, use that texture, turn off our layers in the roof, and paste, add to layers, our hut texture 2 UV texture map. Use texture. So now what you can see is we have, running off of the graphics card, our procedural textures. And in the next part we're going to tidy up the project, we're going to export it into a DirectX format, and then we can move on to loading it into an XNA Game Studio game. Thanks, I've been Matt Taylor for Ravensbridge and Team Kranium, and this has been part 2 of the Team Kranium 3D game series. Thanks for your time.